All right, today we are diving into a story from British India, where the lines between religion, education, and empire got, well, incredibly blurry. We're going to explore how a group of Christian missionaries who showed up in India looking for converts ended up accidentally sparking an absolute revolution in the subcontinent's languages and its education system. So that's the big question, right? How on earth did a mission to save souls end up standardizing languages spoken by millions of people? The answer is this wild story of unintended consequences, a really clever legal loophole, and one incredibly, almost stubbornly determined person. Let's get into it. So first things first, what was the real motivation here? You've got to understand that for these missionaries, education wasn't just about social progress for its own sake. Nope. It was a means to an end. It was the sharpest tool they had for their number one goal, religious conversion. And this quote, wow, it just spells out their entire game plan. They honestly believed that if they introduced Western-style education, it would act like a kind of solvent on local religious beliefs, you know? It would create a vacuum, an opening, that Christianity could then fill. So every school they built, every single textbook they printed, was just one more piece of this much larger religious project. But there was a huge obstacle standing in their way, the British East India Company. See, for the company, this whole thing wasn't about saving souls, it was about profits, plain and simple. And they were absolutely terrified that aggressive missionary work would cause a massive backlash, disrupt trade, and threaten their entire operation in India. And this timeline, it just shows you the 30-year political tug of war. It kicks off in 1783, with the British Parliament basically slamming the door shut on missionaries. But then, by 1800, they find this clever little workaround. We'll get to that in just a second. All this pressure keeps building until 1813, when the official policy finally does a complete 180, and the Charter Act opens the floodgates for missionary work. That shift right there is what made everything else possible. So what was that ingenious solution they found in 1800? It was the Serampore mission, and it was masterminded by a Scottish missionary who becomes the central figure of our story, a man named William Carey. He found a brilliant way to operate right under the nose of the British. And here is that loophole in action. Serampore was this small territory controlled by the Danish, just a stone's throw from British-controlled Calcutta. So by setting up shop there, Carey was essentially hiding in plain sight, just outside the reach of the East India Company. This gave him the freedom to work without constantly looking over his shoulder, worrying about being arrested and kicked out. And from this safe haven, Serampore just exploded into a hub of activity. The printing press they set up in 1800, that was the engine of their whole mission, just churning out texts on a massive scale. And then in 1818, they founded the college, which was basically the brains of the operation, a center for training and teaching that would make sure their work continued for generations to come. Okay, so this is where the story really zooms in on one man, William Carey. From his little base in Serampore, his linguistic and academic output was, to put it mildly, just staggering. It's almost hard to believe one person did all this. And here's the really ironic twist. Despite being this outsider they initially wanted to expel, Carey's expertise became undeniable. By 1801, the British themselves hired him to head the Bengali department at their own college in Calcutta. So from inside the system, working with local scholars, he started creating the very first standardized Bengali textbooks. I mean, just look at this table. It gives you a sense of the sheer scale of his work. He didn't just learn these languages, he codified them. By creating the first ever formal grammars for major languages like Bengali, Marathi, and Punjabi, he was essentially creating a blueprint for their modern forms. This is what allowed for standardized printing and education on a massive scale, an impact that went so far beyond his original religious mission. He also became this incredible bridge between cultures. He took on the massive task of translating the Ramayana, one of the foundational epics of Hinduism, into English. This opened it up to a Western audience for the very first time. And, of course, all of this incredible linguistic work was serving his main project, translating the Bible. And we're not talking about just one translation. This was a massive, coordinated effort to bring the text into dozens of local languages all across the subcontinent: Bengali, Hindi, even the classical language of Sanskrit. The sheer scale of this operation is just, it's hard to overstate. So Let's pull back from Carey's individual work for a second, because we start to see a much broader, much more complicated picture. This whole fusion of education and religion sparked these intense debates about the very purpose of learning inside the British Empire. This slide really captures the fundamental battle over the soul of education in British India. On one side, you have the missionaries, and they are adamant education's true purpose is moral improvement, which to them meant Christian instruction, period. But on the other side, there was this growing push for practical, secular education, stuff focused on worldly skills. This wasn't just a friendly disagreement, it was a total clash of worldviews. And this debate, it wasn't just academic. It had explosive, real-world consequences. The massive Indian revolts of 1857 was a huge wake-up call for the British government. Fearing that all this missionary activity was a key source of local anger, they got cold feet. They dramatically pulled back from directly funding religious education because they were worried it was provoking exactly the kind of unrest they were trying to avoid. The political winds had completely shifted. So, in the end, we're left with this really complex legacy. Was William Carey a pioneer of education who gave structure to languages spoken by millions? Or was he an agent of cultural change, using education as a tool for conversion? Well, the answer, of course, is that he was both. And his story is just this powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest revolutions in history happen as a side effect of something else entirely.